an hour and we did not hear a peep from him. And I was like, I turned to my husband. I was scared to look back there. I was like, is he sleeping? Because as soon as I look, Mommy, I'm hungry. I got to use the bathroom. I want a snack. I was like, I'm not making eye contact, but is he? What's happening back there?
All right. So today I have Dr. Chinwé Williams on the show with us. She is a licensed professional counselor, a board certified counselor, a counselor educator, and a supervisor, and certified in EMDR, therapist. I am super excited to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for
Of
having me.
course, of course. So, one of the things that I have been doing as of late is I've been asking my guests how are they PMS, so physically, mentally, and spiritually, just to get us all
Mhm.
in the habit of actually checking in instead of just saying, "Oh, I'm good." So, I'm gonna ask you, how are you PMS?
I love that so much. I might even borrow that. So, I like to use scales with my clients, and so I use 1 to 10, and we call that SUDS
Okay.
in my line of work, therapy, dealing with trauma and anxiety. So, what are your SUDS? And that stands for Subjective Unit of Disturbance.
Oh,
So, how disturbed are you
okay.
in each category? So 0 is no disturbance, 10 is the highest level or highest intensity. So physically, I would say that I woke up feeling a level of vertigo,
Oh,
which, yes, is no fun for those of you who are listening and you have not experienced it or you don't know what it is. It essentially, it's a function that's dealing with the inner ear, and it makes you feel a little dizzy. And when you wake up in the morning, it makes you feel like the room is spinning. So that is super not what you want to do when you wake up in the
right.
morning. So I would say probably started off at a 7, meaning not great. And then right now in this moment, I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
So I would say level of disturbance 3. Mentally, I feel good. We had a visit. I surprised my mom and my sister over the weekend in Charlotte, and my whole family was there. So it was really wonderful. So that nourished me, I think, mentally and emotionally. So if I'm going 10 is the highest level of disturbance, I would say I'm probably right now at like a
Nice.
1 for mental and emotional health. So thank you for
Of
asking.
course, of course. And I'm happy that you broke that down. And I'm so sorry that you woke up with vertigo. Vertigo is not fun. Oh my goodness.
Thank
Well, I'm happy
you.
that you're feeling a little bit better right now. Appreciate
I
you being
am.
here.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
So you specialize in mental health for children and adolescents. So I would love to hear your journey. What led you to this career path and this specialty?
Yeah, so I actually received my master's degree in just general mental health. It was a counseling degree out of the University of Georgia. And at that time, there was really a statement issued by the state of Georgia saying that school counseling was a high need area. And it was actually considered a critical need area. So, what that meant was there were not enough counselors to meet the need in schools at that time. So I did my master's internship at a college counseling clinic at the University of Georgia. I worked with athletes, I worked with people who were having roommate issues. And I was thinking to myself, oh gosh, so I didn't get it, I didn't really study to be a school counselor. I didn't really know what it meant to work with students at that level. But I'll be honest with you, I thought to myself, summer's off, I can get with
Right?
that. I was also working with severe mentally ill adults at a local agency, so I had a great experience. I think the training was wonderful, but I was intrigued what it would be like to work with young people. And I felt like I was, sort of young at heart and I connected well with young people. So I started my career working as a high school counselor that year. And I'm telling you, it probably would have never happened had they not been looking for anybody that was trained in counseling to work in the schools because I didn't have a school counseling degree. So that really started off my journey. I say it was probably the hardest job I ever had. Started at 22 years old, so I was, just a year really older than the oldest high school senior that was still there.
Wow.
So I was thinking to myself, are these kids gonna like listen to anything I
Yeah.
say?
You probably look
So
like
there was
them too. Like you were like,
I did,
fit
and that
in.
helped in some
Okay.
ways, right? But then you had to make sure that they
Yeah.
respected you, and so I leaned into the senior counselors and really just appreciated the opportunity to connect with young people who were going through things that I remember going through, and in some ways still was, confronting as a young adult, but now I'm a professional. So it was an interesting time, but I tell everybody I've had a lot of different I've worn a lot of hats, different hats in the
Mhm.
field. That probably is, that remains one of the most rewarding experiences I ever had working with teenagers and their families.
Nice, nice. As you were talking, it made me think about how sometimes, and I catch myself, I forget that I went through what my kids are going through at one point, right? Um,
Yeah.
so when a child or a teenager, young person is experiencing, like, let's say, anxiety or just a lot of stress, um, does
Mhm.
it present itself differently than the way it does, let's say, in an adult?
Oh gosh, that's such a great question, Dr. Cassandra. Is it Cassandra or Cassandra?
Cassandra's fine.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that question. So young people go through depression just like adults do. Young people obviously go through anxiety. There are high levels of anxiety happening right now. Um, Young people experience just difficult life
Yeah.
transitions that can generate high anxiety or confusion or distress or even trauma, but it does look a little
Mhm.
different for young people. And this is a great question because when I'm educating parents, I let them know that, the way that you as an adult will experience depression may look very, very different for your child. So you never want to make assumptions that they're,
Mm.
overreacting or they're not going through anything or they're just often angry. So just quite simply, the three issues that we see the most when it comes to teenagers and really parental conflict, the thing that parents really feel like this is pushing their buttons and this is getting on my nerves: defiance, withdrawal, so isolating, and then also anger or
Mm.
irritation. And so part of that is related to just everything that's happening
Yeah.
hormonally, physically, all of the social sort of expectations that surround adolescence. But here's the thing: those are also three symptoms that show up when a young person is dealing with a mental health distress.
Hmm.
Anger is one of those things that even for younger kids, we see anger when they're experiencing high anxiety. We see anger when they're experiencing depression. So a lot of people don't necessarily think
Yeah.
that depression is related to irritability, but it actually is. It's in the
Mm.
definition. So depression is persistent sad mood, but also irritable mood. And so we just want to make sure that parents know that when your teenager is slamming that door, slamming the drawers in their bedroom, telling you they don't want to talk or giving you a lot of attitude, and especially when they're withdrawing from activities that they normally enjoy or the people they normally enjoy doing those activities with, it could be part of just what they're going through as an adolescent, but it could also be the beginnings of a mental health condition. So we just want to pay extra
Hmm.
attention.
So how do we differentiate between, well, they're just going through life stuff plus their hormonal changes versus, oh, this is alarming. Maybe we should, have them seek therapy or intervene somehow. What's the line, if there is a line?
Yes, I think it starts with just knowing what's the prevalent conditions or issues that our young people are facing right now, which actually is pretty different from when I was a school counselor 18 years ago. But right now, as it relates to anxiety, nearly 1 in 3 teenagers will experience an anxiety disorder.
Mm,
So that doesn't mean I'm just nervous. I'm worried, I don't want to talk to this boy, or I'm nervous about this test. All of us experience those things, and that is absolutely a part of
mm-hmm.
adolescence. But when your child is excessively worrying, right, and that worry is occurring more days than not, and this is really important, for at least 6 months. And by the way, those months go by very quickly when you're parenting,
Yeah.
right? But if you're noticing that your child is dealing with excessive worry that's difficult to control, maybe you've given them some strategies, or maybe you've tried to reassure them. The cheer coach has tried to reassure them about some worry about the future, and it's still causing them significant distress. And then here's the other piece that is impacting the way they function at home, the way they function at school, the way they function during extracurricular activities. That's something that we have to pay attention to. So, excessive worry getting in the way of their life in multiple areas more days than not over a 6 month period of time, that's when we really want to get some professional support. And the other really big health condition or mental health condition that adolescents face is depression. So, nearly 1 in 8 teenagers will experience not just sadness, not just low mood. All of those things are a part of being a teenager. They're going to have fluctuations in their mood that sometimes will happen. Like they'll be really, really happy or really, really sad. That could happen 9 times before lunch
Mm.
and be normal. I tell parents all the time that's normal, especially around 13. That's when things really peak. However, depression is feeling that persistently painful mood, sometimes irritability, oftentimes avoidance and withdrawing from things that normally your teenager enjoys more days than not. But this is the significant piece.
Wow.
If it's happening for 2 weeks or more, that's when I tell parents to intervene.
Wow. Whew. So you said for anxiety, it's about 1 in 3, and then for
Yes.
depression, 1 in 8. So it's like more
Mhm.
like most of us are going to have children that are experiencing this, right? You
It's more universal than we think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And you mentioned that, the stressors that they're experiencing now are a little bit different than what we experienced when we were their
Mhm.
age. What are some things that are
Mhm.
contributing, or just the stressors that we may not have experience in, that they're facing
Yeah.
today?
Oh gosh, so there's been a lot of shifts in culture. So we started looking at data starting in 2007, indicating that there are elevating, or at this point, elevated rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and
Mm,
despair among young people. So a lot of people that I talk to will point to the pandemic. Absolutely. The pandemic did a number on young people. It did a number on women. It did a number on people of color. Um, but the pandemic did not start this youth mental health crisis that we have been seeing. I've been paying attention to this really 10
wow.
years prior to the pandemic, where it became concerning and now alarming. I was a school counselor over 18 years ago. I saw, kids go through relationship issues. I saw kids go through, family
Hmm.
conflict and chaos that would show up at
Yeah.
school, right? They aren't sleeping well, they're not doing great in their academics, their relationships are suffering, all of those things. I even saw a little bit of self harming.
Mm,
But what I see now, really, what I saw then, I should say, pales in
wow.
comparison to what I'm seeing now. And this is where, we have more knowledge.
Mhm,
Families, in a lot of cases, are more
mhm.
resourced. We have access to mental health
Yeah.
benefits through our employer. And back in, 18 years
Yeah.
ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. There was still a lot of
Yep.
stigma. So I think several shifts in culture, what our kids are telling us now, and in our book Scene, we talk a little bit about this. We are living in a very, very fast paced
Mm-hmm.
culture. And the fast paced nature of our world today is really leaning more into digital connection versus face to face
Mm-hmm.
connection. And I bet you see this in the conversations that you have with people, like, it used to be 5 o'clock, we get off work and then we can have
Yeah.
dinner and spend time with our family and engage in those things that help us to kind of
Yep.
unwind and get a sense of balance. Now, and this is the case for me too. I'm having to follow up on
Yep.
email. I'm having to check to see if this is an email that I need to follow up
Yep.
on, right? My husband is a toxicologist, and he's, getting dings on his phones, and all of our kids, they have
Yeah.
computers for school, and that it's easy to go from schoolwork to, let me see what Google says about
Right.
this. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So we don't even realize just how distracted we can be. And it's a scary
Yeah.
world. A lot of people don't like hearing this, but I'm going to keep sounding the alarm because as a trauma therapist, I'm so passionate about all of us realizing what's affecting our kids and what's affecting
Mm-hmm.
us. Kids are experiencing mass shootings. We did not experience that. Not in our schools. I remember living through
Yep.
Columbine. It was one of those things that you feel like is never going to happen ever again. That was 1999, I
Mm-hmm.
believe. We've had multiple school shootings in elementary schools, right? And so kids are also, even if your child has never experienced that, and I pray that
Mm-hmm.
your child will never experience that, there are things happening globally
Mm-hmm.
and with the digital connection and access. um, Teenagers are much more plugged into what's
In the world.
happening. And
Yeah.
if you mess around, this is for us too, but as a young person, if you mess around and click or like on an image or a story or a video, and you're just asking, the question, like, what's this about, right? You're just
Gonna
curious.
get
What's going
flooded.
to happen? The algorithm,
Mm-hmm.
what? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
flooded with negative, scary
Mm-hmm.
things that aren't necessarily happening within the
Mm-hmm.
family or in the community that your child is living in, but it still
Of
affects
course.
them because that's where a lot of young people
Yeah.
engage, and spend their time. So we really need to understand that it's not just that kids are weaker or softer or less resilient. They're facing a scarier world than we ever did, and then on top of that, they have the academic
Yeah.
pressures, the social expectations that we also
Yeah.
faced.
Whew. The school shootings. Hopefully nobody has to experience this, but just even the preparation for it, like the lockdown drills. My oldest, he's asthmatic, so when like the pollen is up and stuff, like he'll start to cough. That's how he has his attack. And he was like, one day he comes home, we're driving home from school, and he's like, today we had a drill, and I found a really good hiding spot. But then I started to cough. Then I was thinking, oh my god, what if this was a real event situation? And I started to cough, and I let the shooter know where we were. And I was just like, oh my God. I was just frozen because I was like, I never had to think about things like this. And I'm like,
No, no. And what we don't, I've heard a similar story, almost every single state that we travel in, and teachers,
mm-hmm,
professors, educators, therapists are sharing stories about how the shifts in our culture are impacting their own
yeah,
kids, right? And it's
yeah,
like, yeah, we never had to face this. And what you're saying is such an excellent point. From a neuroscience perspective, those active shooter
mm-hmm,
drills, our kids' developing brains don't know the difference between this is role
yep,
play versus this is really
yep,
happening. So even in those moments when we're thinking that we're protecting our kids, and sometimes police have come into the schools to say this is what needs to happen, kids are freaking
yeah,
out. Parents are telling me that kids are having nightmares, just as they're talking about how to keep them
yeah,
protected. We're elevating their feelings of anxiety and
yeah.
helplessness. It's
Yeah,
tough.
very tough. And you also mentioned the how we're connected. I remember when we were kids, like when I was little, if there was a bully situation, well, when I went home, at least I got a break from the bully then. Because it's like, all right, well, I'm home, I'm in my safe space, bully is not here. But now the technology follows them. So if they have a conflict with a student at school, that person has access to them, kind of in a way, like potentially on social
Mhm,
media
mhm,
and things. So
mhm,
it's like our kids don't really get rest, you know? And I could imagine that's
mhm.
even more so for the teenagers and then the young people in college who just really are connected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
24/7. Well, the research shows that 95%, it used to be 81, according to a Pew research study years ago. In 2022, 95% of teenagers are on social
Mm-hmm.
media. So again, just the universality and just the continuous nature. It's very persistent and it's very
Yeah.
addicting,
Yeah.
you know? So even when children want to put it down, sometimes even for
Mm-hmm.
adults, when we want to put it down, it's easy to pick back up. And so there, you know, I always like to just be
Mm-hmm.
balanced in my messaging because technology isn't going anywhere. It's not that technology is all bad. Even social media is a wonderful way for young people to
Mm-hmm.
connect, to engage in activism, to have their own platforms where they're talking about, you know, positive things. But it's a mixed
Yeah.
bag. It's a mixed bag. And so even the Surgeon General and also the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, they have issued a statement indicating that it is something that we as parents and adults have to pay attention to because there are real dangers associated with social
Yeah.
media.
Yeah. So I have a question, like for, I guess, kind of a preventative question. So knowing
Mhm,
what we know about the lives that our kids are living, right? And the
mhm.
stressors that they have, what can we do to prevent them from possibly developing anxiety and depression? What are some safeguards, if any?
Yes, yes. And you know what? I have just a reaction every time I hear that word preventative or prevention because it's so important to think about the ways that we can prevent things from happening. But ever since COVID, when we were like, what in the
Right.
world? Like,
Yeah.
when parents say, how can I prevent my child from, you know, trauma? And I said, there's some things that we can do to absolutely, you know, try to enact safeguards and guardrails. But in this crazy
Yeah.
world, and I'm a therapist using the word crazy, I don't even love that, but it feels crazy sometimes, right? It feels
Unprecedented.
like an upside down world.
Yes.
And then here's the you know, I don't know when this will be aired, but the election cycle, we're in the full, you know, bloom of it, and the rhetoric, and it just feels like what? Are adults in the room? You
No.
know, what's happening? Um, so it's hard. It's hard to prevent because so many people were impacted by this global
Yeah.
pandemic that we just did not see
Yeah.
coming. However, there are things, you know, just given everything that we're dealing with in this world, there are things that we as parents can do to support our child's mental health, which will help to buffer the effects of anything bad that happens. We can't prevent bad
Hmm.
things from
Yeah.
happening, but we can do our best as loving, caring adults to, you know, mitigate the effects of it. So one of the first things is what we're doing right now. So I definitely want to like tip my hat off to you for engaging in this conversation and just everything you do to really highlight, you know, health and wellness and things that are important for our community to pay attention to. But when it comes to mental health, I think it's important just to state that even though we're talking about it more, there's still remains a stigma, especially for communities
Yeah.
of color. We have learned much more about mental health since the pandemic because, you know, many people discovered that their mental health was
Hmm.
impacted as a result of lockdowns and just, you know, all of the things that we experienced. So, because there's still a stigma around mental health, I think parents who grew up in families and cultures where they were taught explicitly the message was we don't talk about mental
Right.
health, or to have mental health is a bad thing, or implicitly there was just no communication around it. For whatever the case may be, I think it's important to have these discussions. So, the first thing is to normalize that mental health is a part of
Yeah.
overall health, right? We go to take our kids to the
Mhm.
doctor for physical checkups. We have well visits around, all of the things that we need to be paying attention to, physically for our kids. When we go meet with the teachers, you were talking about your, I hope it's okay for me
Yeah.
to share just all the testing,
Yes.
right, with your
Never
kids.
ending.
I have a 9-year-old, same
Hmm.
thing, like testing all the time, and we're preparing them for, how to have good test
Yep.
taking skills, how to go to bed, at a decent hour and eat a good breakfast. I think we need to have more conversations about mental
Yeah.
health, normalize those discussions rather, because those things help to break down the stigma that's associated with, number one, having a mental health
Hmm.
struggle, which we know is
Hmm.
normal, and then number two, seeking help for that struggle when it comes up.
Yeah.
So that's the probably the first and main thing. The other thing is, if you're having those conversations, the output or the outcome of that is that you'll be able to recognize the signs that your young person may be
Yeah.
struggling. PMS is perfect. Was it PMS?
Yes.
Physical,
Hmm.
mental? Mhm. Perfect, because that's like a fun and simple way of just gauging how am I really doing, and how is my child
Hmm.
doing. So we do 1 to 10, at
Hmm.
home, and so that gives me a gauge of where my kid is. And sometimes even today he'll say, you know, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm okay. I'm like, no, 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 one to
Right.
ten. Just even making it, lighthearted and joking about that. So, what happens is, if you've had those discussions where you're checking in on your child's mental, emotional health, and well being, how are they doing socially? For young people, especially teenagers, that social
Yeah.
connection and those social pressures often
Yep.
breed the anxiety and the
Yeah.
depression that we see, right? Finding out who your kids' friends are, addressing issues, helping them to figure out ways to address conflict before it escalates. And all of those things at the end of the day, fosters a sense of safety and connection, which the research shows over and over again is what helps to buffer the effects of any sort of mental health
Yeah.
challenge.
So like laying that foundation from early on before anything is important. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And we can talk a little bit about just, coping skills. So that's the other
Yes.
thing that has come up in the research with young people, is that they don't have, they lack resources in terms of really figuring out how to cope with life's difficulties, um,
So
appropriately.
yeah, let's definitely dive into that. So stress is going to happen. For you're a human, you're on this earth,
Mhm.
there are stressors, and that's just the name of the game. So how
Yeah,
do we, cuz I'll just make it personal. I find myself trying, and I said him, I kind of told him myself, because I'm trying to like prevent all the things for him. I'm like, I don't want them to go through anything. Let me see if I could shield for somehow. But that's not life. That's not realistic. So
yeah,
what are some coping mechanisms that I can start to teach, implement, I can display myself, for when hard times
yes.
come, so that things may not go your way, you may fail at this or that, or friendship conflicts, whatever. But how do I help build that resilience, or just have a toolbox for him?
Um, So good. And that's the word. That is the word of the year, the word of the decade is resilience. And let me just back up. I love that question. Let me back up by sharing that, when we wrote our co-wrote, I co-wrote a book called
Mhm.
Seen, Healing Despair and Anxiety Through the Power of Connection. It came out right after the pandemic
Mhm.
hit. And so I say that's a God thing. And people were saying, I want to get my child into therapy, but the line,
Mhm.
or the wait list is way too long, or it's cost prohibitive. I don't have insurance. I live in rural Nebraska. This is a true story. And I can't find anyone, right? So even though mental health was more so on the forefront, the parents that were really leaning in and trying to be helpful, they couldn't find professional
Yeah.
support. So the good news is a lot of kids um, don't necessarily need a
Oh.
therapist. And then people find that's odd when I say that because I'm a therapist and I do want to stay in business, okay? And I want my friends are getting mad at me right now. But I've got to be
Hmm.
honest. There's not enough therapists to meet the need. We are facing a youth mental health crisis. So we wrote the book to equip parents, caregivers, educators, ministry leaders, anybody that loves a child and wants to influence and promote mental health in general in a child. We wanted it to be very, very simple. And the research supports the fact that it just takes one caring adult who shows up consistently and feels equipped themselves to teach and model really basic coping skills to be able to build emotional resilience in kids. So as we've traveled to around the country talking to parents and educators, one thing that came up over and over again is this generation is the most diverse. This youngest generation, they are the most resourced in terms of they understand these algorithms, they understand technology, they can code something
Right.
very quickly at like 14 years old. um, they're brilliant, but what they lack is coping skills to deal with life when life gets really
Yeah.
hard. And teachers are saying kids look different. Parents are saying, I raised a 25-year-old. My 13-year-old is making me question my whole existence. And part of it is reminding them that the world is
Yeah.
different, right, than it was when you were raising your older child. And then reminding parents that we can actually help them to build resilience as loving people who are consistent. And there are some kids that absolutely will need the support of a
Mm.
professional. And I know you and I will get to how to find that professional. But a lot of kids, based on my research, they just need someone to listen to them,
Mm.
someone to validate them. They want that strong relationship with their parents and other adults. They are teenagers. They are gonna feel big
Yeah.
emotions, as we've discussed. They may even act out. They may be irritable. They are going to push our buttons. But at the end of the day, when we as older people respond to our child's not just physical and educational needs, but their emotional and their mental health needs, that's going to be
Mm.
helpful. So, what are some tips and tricks? Understanding that we are emotional
Mm.
creatures. So my husband is a toxicologist, and I always tell this joke. He used to say to me when we first got married, he was like, "Yeah, I only pay attention to emotions when they make sense." I am an emotional person. So, in that, but isn't that the problem? Like, emotions don't always make
Truly.
sense, right? So, we are logical
Hmm.
beings, but we're also emotional beings. So, how can we as adults help to cultivate what we call emotional literacy? Well, help our kids to recognize their emotions. I love your check in for that. Label their emotions, accept all emotions, because what happens is if it's a difficult emotion, we push that
Yeah.
down, we conceal it, we suppress it, but it's going to come
Yeah.
up. And so, how can we process it in a healthy way? And you hit on something that was really, really important. I'm trying to remember. Oh, you said how, can we as parents model,
Hmm.
healthy habits? Your child, and I'm speaking just universally, my
Hmm.
child, your child, they're going to pick up on our habits,
Yeah.
the healthy ones and the
Yep.
unhealthy ones. So, what can we do just as a family to fold in healthier habits into our family's routine? Things like getting enough
Yeah.
sleep, moving our bodies, choosing healthier foods. I did do like McDonald's last week.
It's
Okay, so
okay.
I am not
It's
perfect.
okay.
I am not. I had to get something quick, and that's what they
Mm-hmm.
wanted, and I was tired of fighting them. You
Mm-hmm.
know what
I
I
get
mean?
it.
It's like, could you do Jackson's? Could you do Chick-fil-A, please? No, mommy, we really want McDonald's, and I think part of it is because I don't want them to have
I
McDonald's.
feel you. I feel you. But
So
yeah, we're on the same boat.
it
Yes.
takes right. So I am not saying that I'm perfect, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
not. So, and our kids don't need
Mm-hmm.
perfection. It's not about getting it right all the
Mm-hmm.
time. But we do know that there's a connection with sugar and anxiety and depression. There's a connection with caffeine and anxiety. There's a connection with highly processed
Mm-hmm.
foods and a host of mental health
Yeah.
issues,
Yeah.
right? Anything that has a high glycemic index. So I don't want to get into all of
Mm-hmm.
that, but those simple
Yeah.
things, just sort of reducing, not taking sugar out
Right.
entirely, but just paying attention to the labels. And I credit my husband as a scientist. I didn't realize how much sugar was in, how many foods had sugar
The
in it,
added
you know?
sugar. I tried. This is a tangent. I tried the what's it called? Oh my goodness, the whole food diet. Whole
Yeah,
30.
Whole
Yes.
30,
And I'm
yes.
like, why is there sugar in my marinara sauce? I was so stressed in the grocery aisles. Like, I did not realize there's sugar in everything. But yes, to your point,
Ketchup,
everything,
pizza
just don't
crust,
have it.
a
Just don't
bagel,
have it.
a bagel with nothing on it, I think has like 26 grams of
Sugar.
sugar. I think I could be lying. I could have made that
No,
up, but
sounds
it's
about
a
right.
lot of sugar, more than you
No, it
think.
sounds about right because I was trying to go back to the whole 30 just to like limit my sugar intake. And I was looking at bagels and bread. I'm just like, okay, these two right here is 50% of what I should be having for a day. Just those. So,
Yes,
but
yes.
when you were talking, it made me think about my oldest has ADHD, and you mentioned the caffeine part. What I realized with him is on the days where I would let him have a chai, he would be a little bit better. But I do notice that he does have some anxious tendencies. So it is hard finding that balance, especially with
Yes,
children I'm finding that are divergent. Um,
yes,
this
yes.
parenting thing, my goodness.
This parenting thing, it's not for the faint of
No.
heart. And I want to just tell you, I see you. I have a child who is on the autism
Hmm.
spectrum. He is autistic. He's 13 years
Hmm.
old. Just turned 13. When he turned 11, I was like, what just happened? And it wasn't easy before then. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But we had like a good
Yeah.
run. We're like, okay. Three was rough, and then we had a good run, probably close to 9 years. Well, give or take some rough seasons. And I was like, this isn't, I'm a mental health therapist, I'm a
Hmm.
professor. You know, but the food piece, and that's why I bring it up, and we talk a little bit
Hmm.
more about that in our second book. But if you ever want to have another
Yeah.
conversation around, neurodivergent children and parenting and some things that we absolutely noticed with the dyes and the sugar and caffeine. Sleep
Yeah.
is critical for all kids, but especially kids with some sort of
Yeah.
neurodiversity. It's a lot to pay attention
Yeah.
to as
A lot
parents.
of moving pieces, especially if you have other
Hmm.
children and then a career and you take care of yourself somehow. Like, it's a lot of moving pieces for sure. Um,
Yes.
so talk to me about we touched back. We mentioned how the pandemic just revealed a lot of just the crisis, not only for kids but also for adults, people of color, women. So now,
Hmm.
when mom and dad are or caregiver are going through it, and
Hmm.
child is also going through it, what I can
Hmm.
imagine is that because the parent is going through some stuff themselves, they may not necessarily notice or have even the bandwidth to fully attend to their child, even though they love their child, all of them, right?
Yes.
So I guess the question would be about like just some self-care. What are your like
Hmm.
basic simple self-care things that maybe
Hmm.
caregiver and the child can do together to help
Hmm.
the whole situation?
The whole situation, yes, because at the end of the day, the answer to the question, how do I help my child's mental health? How do I help my family's mental health? The answer to that is simple, but the sort of implementation of it isn't always simple. And especially as you mentioned, if you have children who are at different levels, have different behavioral and special needs, and you have a career, it's very, very difficult. But I do stress to parents that it's really about maintaining that open communication, reminding yourself that, even in our worst moments, sometimes we're modeling
Yeah.
things that we don't necessarily want our kids to see, but it's not about, beating ourselves up. That's actually the worst thing we can do when we make a mistake. And it's not about shaming ourselves. It's about just recognizing that you're human and you still have an opportunity to bring forth repair. It's easier to do that. It's easier to be kind to yourself and to have open lines of communication with your child, and to recognize that when you mess up, you can repair. Those are the three important things. It's easier to do that when you are mentally
Yeah.
well. It's easier to do that when you are coping um, well enough. And by the way, the research on child development has consistently shown, as it relates to mothers who take on the bulk of caregiving duties, our kids do not need us to be perfect. They need us to be good enough.
Mm.
So I have adopted that when I work with adolescents, I work with families, but I have a great number of women on my caseload who have
Mhm.
children and are dealing with parenting sort of woes and stresses. So I just remind them that they just have to be good
Yeah.
enough, right? And so you can build a healthy relationship with your child by keep showing up. Um, Consistently, and even in little moments that you think are insignificant or mundane, at night with them, like y'all could have been at each other's throats all day. Do not let that issue or that conflict, and I feel like I'm gonna cry right now. It's so interesting, and I'm very open with my
Yeah.
emotions, so
It's okay. It's all good.
I don't want to scare anybody. I'm okay, but I'm recognizing that I'm emotional
Yeah.
about it, because I do work with a lot of teenagers who'll say, we got in a fight, but she didn't even speak to me at breakfast,
Mm.
or she didn't even come in my room and pray with
Mm.
me like we do that every year. So these young people are
Of
noticing it,
course.
but we're in our feelings,
Yeah.
we're human, and so
Yeah.
I do. I'm thinking about one family right now, and she was just like, "Mom's just different, and I know I made a mistake." And so I just encourage, parents to know that you're going to be at each other's throats at times, but just that consistent showing up will help. So that is what you
Yeah.
do for the child, and there's like a host of,
Yeah.
examples of how to do that, and we have that in the book. But in terms of simple coping skills for you as the parent, oh my goodness, um, it's about what brings you a sense of balance, what gives you a sense of peace. Caring for a child, whether or not they have a mental health condition, working outside of the home, working on yourself is hard, and life will hit you in so many different ways, and you're gonna, struggle with different life transitions, and that's going to bring about your own sense of, helplessness, and even hopelessness for some
Yeah.
people. So what you need to do is remember that yes, it's important to employ coping skills when times are hard and when you're feeling vulnerable, but you don't actually have to wait until things reach a
Yeah.
boiling point. This is where prevention really is a beautiful and helpful thing. Um, I know that I pay attention, me personally, just me being very transparent, to different seasons in my life. I've actually journaled throughout my adult years, not
Mhm.
every day, but I've looked back to my journals, and I know the times of the year
Mm.
when it's going to be more difficult for
Mhm.
me to manage my stress
Yep.
levels. I know part of it is around the
Yep.
holidays, because the truth is everything falls on
Yep.
mom,
Yep.
right? And there's so many
Mhm.
expectations for you to do things and show up, but also the beginning of the
Yep.
school year,
Yep.
because if you have a child with special needs or,
Mhm.
ADHD, you're going to hear from the teacher.
Listen.
or you're already anticipating things that you have to do to make sure that their school
Yeah.
year is great. In April, I do a lot of conferences, so I traveled every single week in
Wow.
April and March
Ooh.
actually. So I'm away from my family. I'm sleeping in weird
Yeah.
hotels. But I still have to manage my
Yeah.
household, and so when I'm home, I'm doing a lot. So I can kind of preemptively do some things like schedule a
Mm-hmm.
massage. I actually schedule girlfriend time when I'm really busy.
Mm.
But don't we tend to do the
Yep. The
opposite, right?
retreat. Yep.
When life is really
Yep.
chaotic, we actually don't do those things that can be helpful. But try to be proactive and engage in those coping strategies that's going to help you mitigate again the effects of stress. For some people, is some sort of faith or religious practice or activity. Praying, going to a service. We also don't want to overlook the importance of emotional rest.
Mm.
So it's not even a trip that you go
Yeah.
on or someone that you call. Sometimes it's just dedicating time for you that is, there's no
Yeah.
digital connectivity necessary. Maybe you're reading a book, maybe you're journaling, maybe you're just taking time for yourself. And if you have a supportive partner or family that can let you get out of the
Mm-hmm.
house and do that, that is really, really helpful. And then the emotional rest is also related to expressing your emotions as adults, as parents. I would say for women of color, professionals of color, there's not always that safe space to be able
Yep.
to really share how we
Yep.
feel. Um, and so if you don't have that, it's actually really helpful to journal, to take walks in nature where you don't have a
Mm-hmm.
podcast in, you're not listening to music. Those things can be helpful, but you're just spending time with your own thoughts and
Yeah.
emotions. So those are just some really, really simple ways to be able to cope with difficult
Oh, I
emotions.
love that. And a lot of those are things that we can also pass on to the kids too. Like there should be a time where
Oh,
there's no electronics on. And I'm talking to myself right now. I'm gonna implement this. Like turn off the electronics, let's go outside, let's play outside, walk, something just to disengage for a bit.
just to
Yeah.
disengage. We traveled to Charlotte, as I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned. It's only like a 4 hour flight
Mm-hmm.
drive. And my child wanted to bring his Nintendo Switch, my
Mm-hmm.
9 year old. And my 13-year old, he actually isn't into devices as much. So he just likes to stare out the
Mm-hmm.
window. And I was thinking, he's the one with autism. I was thinking, gosh, that's such a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful thing. My son kept saying, when can I play the Switch? When can I play the Switch?
That's
And
my
we were like,
9 year old.
we went to the library and we got six
Yep.
books. Pull them out of your
Yep.
book bag, read, and tell me a little bit about what you read, and then we'll tell you when you can pull
Yep.
technology out. Now, did he like it? No, but he knew we meant
Mm-hmm.
business. And oh my gosh, before we knew it, it had been like over an hour and we did not hear a peep from him. And I was like, I turned to my husband, I was scared to look back there. I was like, is he sleeping? Because as soon as I look, Mommy, I'm hungry. I got to use the bathroom. I want a snack. I was like, I'm not making eye contact, but is he? What's happening back there?
Oh my
Right? So
goodness.
my husband, he said, and my husband mouthed the words, he's reading.
Nice.
It was over an hour. And so you get lost in that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the conversation, how do you feel? He was like, I feel relaxed. I feel
Mm-hmm.
good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds like my 9 year old. And that actually gave me like reminded me of when they were little. Remember when like the middle of the night diaper changes, like when they were like maybe like 6 months old, and I was to be like actively trying to not make eye contact. When the eye contact happens, it's a wrap. They're up for the night.
uh,
Yep.
they're like,
Right? We're
playtime.
up. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. Where can we purchase the book? Where can we learn more about? I know you speak and all of those things. So, how can we keep in touch with you and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book Scene is available on Amazon. You could also go to thescenebook.com, where you can find some additional
Okay.
resources and articles and blogs. But probably the best way to stay connected with me and to learn about, the books and the resources is through Instagram. So that's the platform that I'm most
Mm-hmm.
active on. And it's Dr. Dr. period Chinwé
Mm-hmm.
Williams. That's my Instagram handle. And then if you are interested in trainings or speaking engagements or just learning more about just mental health resources, my website is drchinwaywilliams.com.
Perfect. And I'll put all of those links down below in the show notes. That way, it's a really easy way for you to go ahead and click, purchase the book, follow Dr. Williams, as well as book her for your organization or whatnot to like to speak, teach you guys all the things, and to get more resources. Thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time. I appreciate your knowledge, and this was a lot of really good food for thought. For us who have smaller kids, and of course, those of us who are in the thick of puberty with our older kids who are going through it. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for just a wonderful platform of just wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.